This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
The Lorecast Paizo beef continues.
This RPG author is only 2 steps away from Obama.
Big ass store out of Eviltown.
The big
which
ass
is
store.
All that and more right now.
Ooh, so drama.
Very dramatic. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast that you've ever heard. And this episode's going to be a good one. I have a feeling. My name's Ben Byrne, and I am joined, as always, by Dael Kingsmill, James Hake, and stepping in for Sean Merwin this week, we are very excited to welcome Erin Roberts to the Lorecast. Welcome, Erin.
We don't need your soundboard, Ben. We can do it ourselves.
Well, we're going to get it anyway when it decides to... it's not going to do it. That's fine. That's fine.
Wow.
That's fine. Yeah.
I feel unwelcomed and I'm leaving immediately.
All right. Now, for folks that don't know, you are, and I feel no hesitation in saying this, prolific as a writer in the tabletop RPG industry. You have worked on, just to name a few, Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel, Dragonlance, Shadow of the Dragon Queen. You contributed to Arcadia, the MCDM monthly magazine back in the day. Strange Hollow, which is back on a GameFound currently, or I think they're about to launch a new campaign. Daggerheart, you contributed to, and Candela Obscura. For Ghostfire Gaming, you've worked on Fables, Agents of the Empire, and you're currently working on Ethereal Expanse, Dreams of the Drowned God. Is there an RPG industry company you haven't worked for yet that you are dying to?
I think it's funny. So I recently went to a convention and I got a calligrapher to write me down a thing that said the Faithless Wench of TTRPGs, because that's how I describe myself. I'll work for anyone. And so I think Draw Steel is probably the only one I haven't hit yet of all the because I've done a bunch of stuff for Pathfinder and Starfinder too. So I think that's sort of the big one, that would round me out. But, like I said, anybody, anywhere, if it's a TTRPG and you have money, I love you. Yeah.
Look at us ignoring Paizo once again. We're so rude
I know.
to them.
I've probably done I think I've done 20 books for them. Anyway,
we love Lorecast Paizo beef continues.
I know. I'm really good old friends with the lead editor over at Paizo, and I'm glad that they don't watch this show because they'd get a really poor
with friends like these. Who needs enemies?
Well, it's not just tabletop RPG companies either, because I know Dael has been dying to ask you about.
I knew you'd throw me under the bus
about Zombies Run. Which I have also used before. When I said Erin Roberts is coming on the Lorecast, Dael's immediate response was, "She worked on Zombies Run?
What is
my
Zombies
goodness!"
Run?
Yeah,
You
never heard.
You can explain it, Dael, probably better than I can.
No, it's an exercise app, but it's alongside a story. So it's like an audio narrative that you are a runner for a population of survivors in the zombie apocalypse, and you have to run around and collect supplies and important research items and things like that. But it's also the voice in your ear is this, and then at the end of the run, they have a little radio show, and you can sort out your little town and build defenses and things. It's the best.
Wait, that's awesome.
Yeah, so it's if you hate running and you need to be distracted by zombies chasing you and a lot of interpersonal drama, Zombies Run is the thing for you.
I remember once upon a time, I think it was back when I was on Tumblr. I remember Will Wheaton posting effusively about this app, about this game. Yeah, this is bringing back a memory to me.
Yeah, it's been around for a long time. Naomi Alderman was the chief person behind it who wrote The Power. If you know that particular awesome book, which was once on Obama's book list. Hey. So basically, I say that to prove that I'm 2 steps away from Obama at any moment. Disturbingly for the Secret Service. Always just 2 steps away.
This RPG author is only 2 steps away from Obama.
I'm going to have people bust in this room and like we're all getting pulled out of frame suddenly.
They pull out the CIA file. What the faithless wench of TTRPGs?
Also my assassin name.
Yeah.
Well, currently, as mentioned before, you are working on the Ethereal Expanse, Dreams of the Drowned God, contributing a chapter to that book. Ethereal Expanse is a setting. It's one of my favorite kind of planar settings. Erin, I wanted to ask what attracted you to this setting in particular?
Pirates. I mean, more things, but mostly pirates. But like cool planar pirates, you know? And like, because they're cool planar pirates, you get to do really cool things that like, ultimately pirates, while fun, there's only so much they could do. Only so many boats, only so much water. But when you're doing cool planar stuff, then they can go to other planes, they can encounter other things, you can get creepy with it, you can get fun with it, you can add a whole bunch of other stuff. And so I love that as like kind of a base, like that like naval feel to it, but then adding like a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, your first exposure to the Ethereal Expanse was in the sort of interim where I handed off the Fable series to our current lead producer, Joe Rosso, when I went to work on the Valican clans. And the pitch I gave him was this big James Bond pastiche, Agents of the Empire, where you went into the homeland of one of the villainous faction of pirates, the Caroline Empire. And all of this was kind of out of a desire to do cool plane spanning, different material planes, different sort of wild stuff. And in my mind, at the very jump of it, the only connecting thread was that in the Ian Fleming novels, Bond was a naval commander, right? He holds, that's the rank he holds. And I was like, oh, it's like a 6 degrees of connection thing before where the plot line goes next. And you guys knocked it out of the park over there. I was not expecting Joe and the team and you to build out this whole like other entire world of the material plane. I thought, well, I didn't know what to expect.
And for the Caroline Empire, I got to do all the world building, essentially. So I built all the different countries and the nations, and I also wrote one adventure. But like, that's the reason there's like a train going through not Evil Town, but basically there's like there's a nuclear disaster in one section, and the only way to get through it is on like a shielded train. And so I love trains. And so anytime I can put a random train in an adventure, I will. And so basically you're stuck on the like Orient Express, so to speak, except it's like the Nuclear Express. And you're just like going back and forth. But there was a lot of fun stuff I got to do with like...
aboard the last Nuclear Express through Evil Town.
Wow. I love that.
What could
that's going to be a
possibly go wrong?
CD for my... for my band, Erin and the Faithless Wenches. There's now more of us. And this is our early work before we sold out.
Yeah.
Experimental, uses train whistles.
It does. Only train whistles. That's the only source of sound.
What corner of the Ethereal Expanse are you currently working on for Dreams of the Drowned God? What can folks expect when they enter the Erin Roberts contributed chapter of this book?
So I'm actually doing 2 chapters because I was like even more faithless than normal. And so they were more faithful than normal. So one is the Sea of Lament, which is basically where the souls of drowned pirates who like haven't dealt with their issues, didn't get enough therapy, go when they die. They're like, oh no, I drowned. Like I can't be reincarnated because like I'm really going through it mentally, emotionally. I should have talked it out with my fellow pirates. But instead, here I am stuck, and they are like stuck in this like world that they can't escape as ghosts. So it's like an all ghost town type of thing.
Purgatory.
If you like pirate purgatory, lots of ghosts. It's run by a dude named the Slender Duke, which is just a really cool name that I did not come up with. And he's like, he basically runs Bad New Orleans. I'm going to say Evil Town New Orleans edition, like CSI New Orleans, Evil Town New Orleans, where you can like gamble your way back into life. Or if you lose, you disappear forever. So that's the one, gambling in Evil Town. And then Wind Riders of Drivengale, which is basically like, caw-caw! I mean, like, those, if you ever played Slay the Spire and you fight those birds?
Yeah.
This is where Driven Gale is where they live. In Birdland. So it's where people fly around.
Descriptions are really getting me.
People and unfortunately their world is being destroyed by toxic pollution. This is kind of like an episode of Captain Planet with birds. And so it's they're we'll kill you all. And so you have to go somewhat set things right in Driven Gale with the Wind Riders.
Nice.
Erin, I need you to describe everything forever.
Did he have a phone book there or something?
My caw sound. That's my favorite thing. I just say that sometimes when I'm walking around working on the chapter. Anyway.
James, what about yourself? Because you're obviously you guys are working as a team together with Will Doyle. I knew that.
Yeah. This is an interesting point. Is that Erin and I are on the same project, but ultimately our chapters don't have a lot to do with one another, and so we're kind of working in parallel. We're on totally different train tracks, and we can look over and wave at each other in the midst of things if we want to, but we're never going to sort of run astride each other. And it's really people like Joe and Will who have the joyous task of braiding the threads we're creating together. I'm also working on 2 chapters. Erin, your chapters, they're kind of in the heart of the adventure, right? They're in the meaty middle of it all. And I have the tail end of the adventure, the grand climax, and this sort of optional side quest that you can take in order to give yourself a better fighting chance at taking down the villains of this adventure. That one I want to get to first because I think it's really exciting. It is a journey into a Fey realm called Erstworld that basically sees you as pirates wanting to steal the moon. It's the greatest haul you can ever do because the moon of this Fey world is actually, you know how the British crown has these sort of regalia, the orb and scepter. Well, one of the gods of the expanse, Asteth the Empress, is Empress of Fire, who has sort of been framed for grand villainy in this adventure to cover up for another evil force. One of the Fey rulers, the Dowager Queen of Erstworld, stole the crystal sphere of Asteth from her hand. And so it has been hung in the sky of this Fey realm as the moon. And you find yourself plopped in the middle of this sort of maritime, piratical Mad Max Fey culture, where all of these Fey duchesses, they're all sort of gender neutral, androgynous, but they use terms like duchess and princess and stuff like that. And you are in this piratical death race to get to the moon and use some Fey magic to draw it down from the sky and wield its power aboard your ship. And if you're wondering how you can sort of tie a moon onto your ship, that's something the chapter reveals. I think it's a fun little visual moment. That chapter is all gas, no brakes. It's just like it's a railroad. I think absolutely, though you do have some choices of where to flip the tracks, right? Go on to track A, track B, or track C, but it is going forward at all times. And that makes it a great contrast to the final adventure, the final chapter of all of this, where you have gathered all the allies and power that you have opted to. You've done one or more of the side quests to kind of lead up to the finale, and you've learned who the main villain is, where they are, what their scheme is, and the only thing left to do is beeline to their evil dungeon and defeat them. This is a story that we've seen a number of times before in official Wizards adventures, right? Prince of Elemental Evil, defeat their prophet, stop the otherworldly threat from going in. And it's a classic for a reason. And we have it sort of braided in the Pirates of the Ethereal Expanse tradition of going to the deadly seafloor of the Ethereal Expanse itself. And we're one-upping ourselves, because the original Pirates adventure did this too. You go to this ruined astral titan city, Astrium, and we're doing you one better by going far beneath the seabed of the Expanse to this sort of otherworldly nightmare dimension in order to stop the awakening of a fell god. And it really digs into sort of the mythic lore of this setting. in a way that I've wanted to from the very beginning. So I'm rubbing my hands with glee and delight writing every little bit of this. There's a great sort of a Super Metroid style escape sequence at the very end where, you kill the load bearing boss and the base starts to explode and you need to get out. There's a moment like that in Call of the Netherdeep, which has a similar sort of conceit to it, where I wrote this section and I feel like what hit the final book was not what I wanted it to be, a combination of me having never done an escape sequence like that before. And so when Will said in the outline, we want something just like this, I was like, okay, good. I get to redeem myself. And what I think of as kind of a moment of imperfection. I'm like, okay, how do we do this, but better? Escape from a collapsing underwater base. And if you ask me, it rocks. It's so much fun.
It feels very, from hearing this description of the narrative that players are going to go through and the GM are going to guide their players through, it feels a little Mass Effect 2. Would that be fair to say? You're sort of bouncing around the ethereal expanse on your ship. You're completing different objectives in different areas, but ultimately you have this kind of final goal, the suicide mission, so to speak, where you've got everything ready. Your party, your crew is ready to go, and you go into this final confrontation. Is that fair to say? Am I getting the right sort of vibes here?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah. I'd agree. For the chapters I'm doing are that kind of do this mission to achieve this piece of information or get this ally on board, get the birds on your side, which is always good advice in life. And so and then you can move forward to do this amazing thing at the end.
I am curious to ask as well, because both of you having a lot of experience with this and me having a little bit of experience, particularly working with mostly James and Sean, around what it is like working on a large project like this, an adventure project as a team of freelancers. You talked a moment ago about how the two of you are sort of, nuclear trains on differing tracks that will pass each other but don't necessarily cross-pollinate your sections of the adventure directly. Is that a typical experience? How are you working with Will? And it's also worth mentioning Andy Collins also contributing on this as well.
I can't psychically read Will's mind, but when I'm in Will's shoes, I am doing my best to spin a lot of plates at once and download a lot of information, right? Because I'm giving out an outline, and then a bunch of writers are fulfilling the brief, but also injecting a lot of their own personality and storytelling style into it. And so then all of a sudden it becomes this major task of keeping the entirety of the book in your head at once and being just like the world's greatest communicator in kind of connecting the people who need to be connected and figuring out what the next step for every chapter is. And so, my experience with Will is that he's very busy, right? And it's like, okay, I don't need to sit down with you every day and have a chat about what we're doing. I need to trust you and see that you are taking what we've created and shepherding it through to be something magnificent and cohesive.
Yeah, I think the thing when any of these group projects, and this is no different. When you have a really good team lead, what they're doing is they do the pre-work, a lot of the pre-work for you in coming up with a cohesive narrative and giving you an outline and telling you sort of, here are the things you need to hit. It's here are the load bearing walls of this narrative experience. This needs to have, there needs to be a door here. There needs to be a wall here, but what color the wall is painted, what pictures you hang on the wall, that's up to you. And so I think a lot of it is when you describe it really well, you can have, meetings and touch base, and you always want to have those kickoffs and those touch points. A really good lead is it's like having a really good blueprint for a house where you only need to check in so often, because a lot of times you're like, well, let me look back at the blueprint. Oh no, the wall goes right here. I have the answers that I need. And when I don't have the answers I need, I know I'm asking a smart question because I've already looked through and maybe I did something super unanticipated and I want to ask, can I shift this in a way that you're not anticipating? Will it make the house come down, or is there a way to incorporate it and still keep everything standing up?
It's a levels 1 to 13 adventure. It's currently kickstarting right now. If you're watching this on YouTube, there will be a link that way, I think. That way, one of these ways. Whichever way Dante flips me around, there'll be a link. It'll be down in the description as well if you're listening on Spotify or anywhere else. It's in the Twitch chat now. Dreams of the Drowned God. James, I know you've been following the kind of funding goals very closely, very excitedly sharing them. Your enthusiasm for the Kickstarter kind of while it's in flight is genuinely infectious. I love it.
We're very nearly done with all our stretch goals. You know, if you're listening live, we've just hit 175,000 American dollars, which is 25K short of our final stretch goal, which is to get this thing on Alchemy VTT, which I don't even know how to express how excited I am to get this thing on Alchemy VTT. Their tabletop, their virtual tabletop, is the sleekest, most stylish one I think I've ever seen. And it's the sort of just like aesthetic bombast that I think the Ethereal Expanse really deserves. I can see it in my mind's eye, the wispy threads of ether kind of rolling through the scene, all Pirates of the Caribbean style, like a ship cutting through the misty night. And just like I trust Alchemy to deliver on that stuff. So if you're listening, make my day, right? get us to 200K, get us to Alchemy, because I just be overjoyed to have this adventure with them.
Well, speaking of Alchemy and collaborative projects, there is a little bit of news this week, a little peppering of news outside of Ghostfire for this week's podcast. Wizards of the Coast have apparently hired a team of 15 video game developers, formerly of Cliffhanger Games. If you're following the absolute dumpster fire that is the video game industry at the moment, Cliffhanger Games was unfortunately shuttered earlier in May by EA, who owned the studio, I believe. They were working on a Black Panther video game, which got cancelled. The studio got shuttered. 15 of those developers have been scooped up by Wizards of the Coast, including Michael DePlatter, who people may know their work from Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor, which they directed over at Monolith back in the day.
One of my favorite games of all time.
Oh, there you go.
I love the Nemesis system. This is not a new thing to say. It is a system that is trademarked by WB, which good for them, but it infuriates me because it is the most
terrible for the games industry.
It's the most. It's like Atari trademarking games to play on loading screens. That's why there are no mini games on loading screens in every game, because Atari holds it. The Nemesis system is an incredible sort of systemic procedural generation for orc bad guys, bosses that you face throughout the game, where there will be all of these different kind of encounters you can have. You'll fight hundreds of orcs across the game, but sometimes when you beat one, they seem like they've died, but they've cheated death, and now they come back with a scar or a sort of, a hook for a hand, or they've had their head stitched back together. And this can chain and branch out in fascinating ways that create this very personal story just through an interlocking web of systems. Even orcs that, remember you when you flee from battle, or orcs that can be brought to your side, right? You can command them to join your army with your magical ghost powers. It's a game that has barely any hard-coded story at all. It's all about the story that you create over the course of your adventure. And in a sort of classic old-school D&D way, that's really compelling.
Yeah, well, correct me if I'm wrong. The other thing is that as part of the narrative of that game, when you die, your character kind of respawns because you're like inhabited by the spirit of Celebrimbor or somebody.
You're sort of undead. Yeah.
When an orc kills you, that's not just like, oh, we're reloading the previous save. That becomes part of the story because you respawn.
Yeah.
And so orcs can get promoted, like even just a random scrub. I haven't played the game, so correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong. But my understanding is like a random like minion can get promoted because they managed to kill you.
Yeah.
And then you can end up with these long-term rivalries that kind of last half the game. Because if they kill you again, they can get promoted again. Or if you kill a captain above them, they get promoted into that slot. So yeah, it's an incredible system.
You should play that game. It's on sale for like $5 every now and then. Look for Middle-earth: Shadow of War, the sequel to Shadow of Mordor, because its systems, it's basically the same game, but the systems are deeper, and the systems are the point of that game. Play Shadow of War, play it for like 20 or 30 hours. It's awesome, and it's usually only $5.
Well, that's not the game that Wizards of the Coast are making.
But they're getting that pedigree.
Yeah, exactly. So 15 cliffhanger games, previous cliffhanger games, have joined Wizards of the Coast. They are currently in the concepting stage of a new video game for Wizards of the Coast. This is separate from the Giant Skull D&D game that we talked about, I think, 2 weeks ago that they're working on. This is also separate from Schrodinger's Baldur's Gate 4 that is theoretically currently in development. There's actually no word on whether this is specifically a D&D game either. Because remembering Wizards of the Coast also technically have Exodus, the sci-fi video game, in development at the moment.
Could they like bring it back and call it like the hater system or like some other like just make it just like scrub the serial numbers off and then like who would ever know? Because I feel like I wonder if some of the like follower was it in Netherdeep where there's like the entire other team that you can be like playing against at the same time. But that, when you were talking about it and D&D, I was like, I wonder if there's some interest in thinking about how another party or rival party could work over time, and they'll just become your haters and not your nemesis.
I think that would be awesome. They could expand this sort of, because Nemesis system is just procedural generation, right? It's a really sophisticated bit of procedural generation and like different flags that show up. But you could apply that to a location rather than to characters. I wonder if that would skirt the line of whatever sort of patenting they've done or WB has done to make it fair play. Because, you know, we're assuming that those designers are really keen for that kind of system, right? They might not be. But if they do, if they bring that pedigree to the title, having like doing what's it called? Undermountain. Doing Undermountain with its shifting halls and shifting faction allegiances and stuff like that. If you could take the Nemesis system and apply it to a place more so than to like individual orc minions, I think you could get kind of the best of both worlds and twist it up a little bit.
They can call it the Schnemesis system.
It's a good system.
And then the last little bit of news here. Coming in, I actually found out this from Instagram. Somebody messaged me from Leandro, thank you, that Greg Bilsland has announced, the executive producer of D&D, has announced via the D&D Wizards Instagram account that D&D 2024 will be returning to Brazil in a partnership with Gallipolis, who I believe are owned by Asmodee. The books will be translated. The D&D 2024 rule books will be translated into Portuguese once more. This is following 8 months ago, I think it was roughly, where Wizards, they were doing translations in-house and then they halted them for Portuguese specifically. So through a partnership deal with Gallipolis, they are returning to Portuguese translations. Sick!
Hell yeah.
Yay!
Yay! More D&D for more people. Yay! More people should email this podcast at ghostfiregaming.com to ask questions just like this mysterious individual, Shmael Schminsmill.
I think you'll find it's Ishmael Ishmingsmill, actually. So,
sorry, I got the name wrong.
I mean, go on. Who is this mysterious stranger?
Asking about adventure narratives, specifically for publication, which is kind of dovetails with our conversation from earlier. 2 weeks ago, we talked about building adventures as game masters and building adventure narratives specifically. How far in advance do you plan? How flexible do you make those plans? We had Mike Shea talking about, the lazy dungeon master approach of like, you plan, but you're not like writing an adventure module ahead of time. If you're GMing the game, that's just too much work. Ishmael Ishmingsmill wanted to know how that changes when you're writing adventures for publication. James, you something that jumped out at me earlier, which I think some people would be like, oh, well, that doesn't sound very good, is the idea that like pre-written adventures are a little bit more railroaded, or they can be, and they can have that feel, which the railroad being a very kind of prejudicial term in terms of like how people feel about even just using that word. But you can't fit everything into a book. There's no infinite pages book in existence. What's the approach for a narrative campaign?
I think the word railroad is describing a legitimately bad thing, but its definition has expanded to encompass good things, right?
Sure.
I think the difference between a railroad and a linear adventure is vast. A railroad is when the DM or GM, it can happen in any game, literally makes decisions for your characters or removes all but one decision, right? It's not even presenting you with the illusion of choice anymore. It's literally removing choice from you. You bet you're staying on the rails. There's no avoiding it. A linear adventure, I think basically every published adventure that has a plot is a linear adventure because they can only account for so many things. Even the adventures, when I tout the sort of pools and streams method, it's still a linear progression because there is a start and an end and you're going there. The fact that you get to, get off the train and explore the station for a little bit does not change its linearity. In
Evil Town.
Right. You get off the nuclear train, you get to walk around Evil Town Station for a little bit. It disguises its linearity a little bit, and it offers a wealth of choice for players to take, which is, I think we say, the point of these games. And it does so in a way that people who think of railroading in sort of the colloquial terms that we've come to define it as, linearity writ large, it makes it more palatable.
Sure.
And unless you're running, say, Keep on the Borderlands Cave of Chaos, which D&D has just released as a box set, which is a total sandbox. It is a location, and it has prompts, and it has characters that you can kind of interact with in these sort of radiant, emergent ways. There's no big story, right? There's no final boss. It's just a lot of stuff that you can do in a place. And all of that story is developed by the players at the table. That's a perfectly valid way of doing an adventure. It's just not the dominant way right now. It was the dominant way back in the 70s and 80s. And for one reason or another, it's changed. Because I don't think you can write a 300-page adventure book that is that open and that sandboxy. And people like a story. I think maybe even the majority of D&D players right now like a linear story with a beginning, middle, and end, as long as they get to make choices of some magnitude throughout it.
I mean, emergent narratives are fun, like where you can the narrative comes from the thing around you. When we talked about the Nemesis system, that's what that allows for. But it's doing a lot of work behind the scenes as a video game to make that happen. That one person, it's going to be real hard for you to actually track all that in a book, because as a GM, you can say we're not following X anymore. I'm not going to worry about it. But in a book, you can't just drop I don't think anyone will follow this line. Who cares? You actually, anything you introduce, you do have to sort of give some content around it. And so I think a lot of it is things that I think about when I'm doing an adventure are, number one, this is slightly unrelated to the question, but very important. Always tell the DM where they're going. I think sometimes people will forget when they're writing adventures for other people to run that it's not a story where the DM wants to be surprised midway through that we just went to Utopiaburg, but it was secretly Evil Town. If it's secretly Evil Town, you need to tell the DM, in the notes, Utopiaburg, secretly Evil Town, because otherwise they're not going to set it up well from the start. So there's no secrets between the writer and the DM. The secrets are between the DM and their table, and you have to give them the information they need. And so that's number one. Number two is always providing opportunities for choice. I love to create a little, I don't know what the streams and pools things is. I could guess. Sounds fun. Sounds like a great Six Flags expansion park.
I'll describe it in one sentence. It's when your adventure starts at one point with very limited choices, and then it expands to a wide open sandbox, and then contracts again to a single decision point, and then you move on from sandbox to sandbox, daisy chained like that. This
actually reminds me of, this is a slight aside, but some of the other things I do are, I also do interactive fiction here and there. And I actually wrote for if you have children who have little Yodo boxes, which are audio books for kids, I did the D&D Choose Your Own Adventure audio for kids called Forge Your Quest. last year, which is really cool. So I think a lot about how like choice works, and there are actually these really cool, maybe we can link to it somewhere once I find it after this, like look at how different choice models work. And so in interactive fiction, like there's the Cave of Time, which is how a traditional choose your own adventure works, where you just go down a path and die, and then you go to the start, and then you go down a path and die, and then you go to the start. Like, but what you're talking about is sort of one of those methods where you kind of expand out through choice and then narrow back in. But looking at those is really fun because it can give you a sense of like how you can run choices through an adventure by saying like, this is the way I want my choice pattern to run in this particular adventure because it works well with the theme. But this different adventure needs a different set of choices. But
I love having I would have learned if I'd gone to a game design course in college.
No. It would be the kind of stuff you learned if you read Emily Short's blog, who is an amazing interactive fiction writer, who like is the person who originally kind of introduced me to this concept. And she worked on The Fall in London. And if you know those people, like, yeah.
Yes.
So
I learned much of what I've learned by playing the Fall in London games. Absolutely.
If you spend too much time on the internet, basically, then you might, like me. But I love that kind of thing. And like a lot of times a small choice, like do you go to the left or the right? And you can create enough content as a writer for both sides to have their thing. And you can even make it seem as if there's even more paths that can't be taken, but like the left and the right are the only ones available to your party. And they're different enough that it feels like you actually got to make because you did actually get to make a substantive choice. But at the end, like those branches eventually get you back to some like major stream, I would assume, in the ponded stream. And then the other thing, final, before I stop rambling, is I will say that I also, really like the fail forward. So that's a big thing when you never have, like, anytime someone fails something, it can feel really railroady when you're like, no, you have to go over this wall. And like, that's number one, the only way you can get through this wall is by climbing it. Yeah. And if you don't climb it successfully, you never get over it. I'm always like, you should provide 3 or 4 ways for people to get through a major obstacle. And you should provide a way that if all of those fail, there's some other way to get to the key information that you need. That way you're still moving forward, but how you move forward is up to you.
I want to jump in on this because this is a topic that comes to my mind when I'm playing open world games too. Breath of the Wild comes to mind for me because that is a game where you can solve its many little puzzles in a truly, I think, near infinite number of ways. And this has 2 interesting outcomes. One of which is the game feels like the world is your oyster, right? There's no prescribed solution. And even if there is a prescribed solution that is very obviously intended, like when you tilt the controls to roll a ball through a maze, you feel like a genius for snipping the Gordian knot, for flipping the maze so that you land the ball on a flat plane and then motion control yoinking the ball so it jumps into the cup or something like that. You've taken the alternate path. But the flip side of this level of freedom is that sometimes it can feel trivial, right? It can be very hard for a developer to put a highly calibrated challenge in front of players if the goal is freedom, because you can always just find the path of least resistance. And you're no longer being tested on, your intelligence or your dexterity or whatever the game is trying to test you on. And so the question that these 2 things bring up in my mind, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it, is in a tabletop RPG, does it matter or is it beneficial for us to test players' skill in that way, to test their tactical thinking, say in D&D? Or when we're making RPGs like this, even ones with tactical components like Draw, Steal, or D&D, is the entire point to tell a story, and thus a real hardcore test of skill is not the point any longer.
Interesting. Like, I think it's funny, before I answer that question, you were talking a little bit about Breath of the Wild before the cube came and fought me. And so I was thinking a lot about emergent. So I love thinking about emergent gameplay. And like what happens when you don't create story is that humans are the most storytelling creatures on the planet. That's actually how we have survived, because we were able to tell a story to like not eat that mushroom, because it's like, not only is it bad, but like we have a whole story as to why it's bad and it's compelling.
There's demons in that mushroom.
Don't cook pies out of mushrooms,
No beef Wellington.
Yeah.
Oh God. I feel like I'm suddenly
This is
on
some
that.
Aussie
What's that
reference.
show where they're always
Do you not know? Oh my God.
Oh
we'll
my
tell you
goodness.
later.
We'll tell you later, yeah.
they're always messing up the beef Wellington for like that dude.
The mushroom murders, as it has become known. Anyway.
no.
Wait, what? Anyway,
Oh, goodness.
No, we
Yeah,
can't
please,
sidetrack
please,
from
anyway.
this.
Yeah. Dante,
This is like
Steve.
This is like when potatoes killed a whole family, and I'm not going to say any more than that. But you'll just have to wonder about that one. But the like one of my friends played Dragon Age Inquisition and like killed all the dragons because they were like, obviously this was the point of the game. It wasn't. It was just a series of side quests, but there were like 7 of them, so it felt really like a good number, and like they were hard to kill. And so when they killed them all, they got they got no acknowledgement from the game, and they were really disappointed because like the game didn't anticipate that they would create this narrative out of it. And I think to answer your question, like a lot of times the narrative that we're creating in the game is about how our characters are able to do things and not able to do others. So the skills are important in that they let us tell our personal story of like, I am the most genius lockpick of all time, and I can pick every lock. Oh no, this lock defeated me, but now with my friend's help, I did pick the lock. And like, that's the story that you're telling yourself while you're playing, that like in some ways is only in your head. Like some of it you convey, but some of it just like stays behind the surface and is the thing that keeps you excited to actually make the schedule the next time you're supposed to play the game and not cancel 18 times in a row. You know what I mean? So like, that's the thing. It's that personal story. And so I think a lot of times when I'm thinking about skill checks, it's like, what can we do to like help people tell the story of who they are and how they've grown and why this challenge is different, but they have grown to face it.
You know, the forward motion that narratives need to have, that adventures need to have, is very important. You never want the players to get stuck. It's one of the reasons like mysteries can kind of be a little bit of a struggle. But as I've thought of the Monster Hunt as a like style of adventure, it kind of tries to do both, right? Where it acts as a mystery a lot of the time. You're diagnosing what the monster is that you're going to go fight, but you can't let that mystery get in the way of the forward progression. And so the way that I tend to structure those adventures is that you will find the monster, you will fight it, and because talking in a 5th edition context, your characters are generally all pretty good at fighting things, you will probably defeat it. But if you engage fully with the story and you succeed the checks that are put along the way, you discover what the monster's weak to because you recognize it from its tracks. You discover what types of damage the monster does because you've inspected the corpses. These are examples I've used before. That's the skill of players engaging with the game fully. That's not mandatory to get the entire story, and not mandatory for players to take an interest in if they're not as interested in that sort of like minutia. But it's one of the reasons I think Witcher Watch for this week's episode, The Witcher has been so successful as a video game, is because you feel like a friggin' genius when you put it's not hard, like it's not that it's particularly difficult to figure out, but you put the right oil on the weapon, you figure out what signs you need to cast to slow this monster down, you use Yrden for ghosts, you use Igni for neckers or something, and it makes you feel really proficient and really skilled to engage in those systems.
Yeah.
But you don't have to be able to complete the narrative. And I think that's the line I find when I'm doing like a pre-written adventure. That's the line that I try to kind of walk is allowing them to always, as Erin said, fail forward a little bit or find alternate paths. A great example of this that I remember happening in one of my campaigns was I play tested a monster, and one group were really like, okay, how do we lure it out of its lair? Because we know that it's not going to be good to fight it in its lair, and it likes meat, so let's go get a bunch of deer. Let's really tactical think this out. And they absolutely destroyed this thing. And then another group of players were just like, it's in there, charge! And they just ran in and almost TPK'd themselves upon it. And both had a ball, you know. It's just the skill level doesn't stop the ability to engage with the adventure. It might just change the experience, depending on what players want to engage in. And I think there's also like, sorry to ramble, but on the flip side of that, the skill of like role playing that people might be more interested in as well, you know. the skill of like knowing what questions to ask or wanting to literally ask questions of the NPCs rather than just rolling their persuasion check, and you deciding, okay, well, because you've asked the right question, I'll give you a little bonus on that persuasion check or whatever, if they're less interested in the skill of combat. You know what I'm saying? So there's kind of like, people can take interest in different skills of the tabletop RPG that they're playing.
I mean, I am but a humble lorecaster. So I can only imagine what Ishmael Ishmingsmill was thinking when they posed such a question. But I suspect they would be curious to know, this mysterious person, if you have any further advice in regards to like all of this information that we've been talking about is great, but how do you present that in a more formal context, right? Because like, I think that I have enough experience as a dungeon master. I could make my own notes that would sort of reflect all this stuff, and I would be able to, on the fly, kind of guide my players through this, even if my notes didn't cover that sort of a thing, and even though they're a bit of a mess. But if I was trying to sort of organize this information, whether it be for a sandbox adventure or a linear nuclear railroad, or whether it be for, you know, any number of these things, how do you present that information to the players, and especially to the DM who's going to run the game? If you were to be writing this for like an adventure that you want to publish on the DM's Guild, or an adventure that you want to be writing for a third-party company or whatever, because you all have more experience in that than either I or Ishmael Ishmingsmill. I would be curious for more advice on that. That point about making sure to let them know that Utopia Town is actually Evil Town. That's like a great place to start. I'd love more sort of.
I just, on that note very quickly, I love when an adventure has like a reasonably detailed but still relatively concise like description of the entire adventure from start to finish at the start of the adventure, because as somebody who struggles to sit down and read adventures like start to finish before I run them, knowing where I'm going, I ran through Tomb of Annihilation going, having no idea where I was going the entire time. You know, being like, I really need to figure out what these like chaos gods are about, or like whatever it was, because they kind of seed earlier in the adventure what they are. So having like concise stuff like that's very helpful.
Yeah, this is like a weird metaphor for it. But when I started having editors edit my YouTube channel instead of doing it myself, I had to completely like change the system I was using for filming. Because I would have I would have really skeleton sort of notes on what I wanted to talk about, and I would ramble. And like when I'm editing it, it's fine if me in the footage freezes and looks away from the camera for like anywhere between 5 seconds that felt like an eternity to 5 full minutes that felt like not that long, and just stares into space and then says something completely irrelevant to what I was just talking about, because when I'm editing, know, she's saying that because she wants me to interpose it into something she said earlier. Like I have that information. Right. Whereas when I hand it to an editor, I can't do that to them. They don't know what I was thinking. They have no idea. That's a bad system. So if I'm using an editor, I have to script it out much more substantially. My editors have asked for copies of the script so that they can, like Ben was saying, know ahead of time where this is going, so that they're editing, they don't have to like go back and change things. And I just wonder whether there's any similarity to that in terms of like personal notes for a home game versus something that you're handing to someone else to experience.
Well, just to be concise for a second, like the way I think that adventure writers could, I'm not going to say should, but could approach adventure writing is to think of it as a script, and the GM is the director who's going to bring it to life. You know what I mean? And
here's the one thing that'll change about that answer, Ben. That is true, but in a script, they don't tell you the bullet point outline of the adventure at the beginning, right? A script is a functional document for the actors to use.
Telling you the Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
Two houses, both alike in dignity.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about the prologue of Romeo and Juliet and then the script to follow is a surprisingly good way to think about this sort of thing, because a lot of unpracticed adventure writers will write their adventure with these reveals that sort of shock the DM as if the point of the adventure is to be read and not to be a reference book for while you're running. And that's the thing. You need to know basically all of the important information up front, and it continues on from there. In Dreams of the Drowned God, the fairy chapter that I wrote, there is a really important character reveal about an NPC that you meet in the first encounter of that entire like sub-adventure. I don't have any scene or anything that mandates when that NPC's true identity is revealed to the players. But it could happen at any point, and it must happen at some point so that the moon can be acquired by the pirates. And so if I don't tell the GM up front, somewhere in the chapter introduction, hey, you got to communicate this somehow. And so you need to know the truth of this character from the very beginning so that you can role play it in a way that will guide the players to want to seek out the truth. The GM is going to be way in over their head. They won't know how to do it.
Yeah, I would add, especially, this is also really true with like maps. And like, if you have a map in your adventure, it's really good to tell people, like, tell the DM, like, the map ends here. Like, ultimately, your characters will need to get to the big ass door that is the big ass door out of Eviltown.
The big ass door.
Yeah, there you go. It's there. No, it's the big door at the end. And like, they're going to need to get there, but it requires 4 keys, which can be found here, 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 and here.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's like, because a lot of times people just be like, in this room, there's the key. And you're like, the key to what? Are there other keys? How many keys are there? You hate to guide your players through to a door and then be like, oh, they could have gotten that key like 3 rooms ago, and I didn't know to make sure that they kind of got there. Something I've been loving also doing recently, which is something I've picked up more, is to actually explicitly talk about how different parties might accomplish the same task, especially with large non-linear dungeons or large non-linear, to say like a more persuasive, like there are 3 ways to get the keys to the giant ass door. The one is to like dig around and find them. Like, parties that really love exploration might like love doing that. This is kind of the way that this goes. Parties that are really into persuasion can also talk to that guy that's stuck in the dungeon in this room. Like, and just giving a sense of like combat focused people can find them by fighting 1,000 silver demons and then using them to make the keys. I don't know, whatever. And parties will always find like some 8th way that you did not think of. But I think by like giving a sense of like, here's one path, here's another path, and also whatever path you want is a nice way to go. Because like when you get to the dungeon page, you'll look at it like physically, like this room leads to this room. But I think it's always nice to be able to go back and look at a guide as sort of like, which are the important rooms? Which are the big things? Here's where like there are 18 monsters lurking, so that if you have a DM at the end of their session, they're not going to lead their players into like a horrible fight that they don't have time to run. So knowing where those big things are and then telling the DM where they are so that they can run their own session, knowing their players and what they'll be into, is something that I find is really a good thing to do when you're writing, that you would do in your head when you're running it, and that you might, and to also account for the player types you don't like and that you're not. So like, I am a talker and an explorer, not a fighter, but like I, still have to put combat in. On the other hand, if you love combat, like you should always think, is there an opportunity for for people who suck at fighting to get through this? Is there a way for people to do it more than one way, and then provide that?
Yeah, I think it also helps with the sense of linearity through a pre-written adventure. Is just not like, I'm not a huge fan of it's like GM advice I've heard a couple of times, which is like, I don't like design solutions. I just come up with a problem and they have to like whatever when they say something clever, then it solves the solution. And it doesn't really work for pre-written adventures because like,
as a player
that can become
who
such
loves
a block.
Solving riddles, I hate the idea that I didn't actually solve a riddle.
Exactly that as well. Like you just like saying random stuff until you say something that the GM's like, yeah, okay, I'll let you pass. But I think providing multiple routes shows the game master that you've thought about it as well. You've thought like there are many, like there is player choice within this, getting past this obstacle. I've thought about it. There are other, like you said, Erin, there's an 8th solution your players might come up with, or they might combine 2 solutions somehow, or they might, do something, this character can be persuaded to let them through, but they decide to use intimidation instead. You didn't have the lines on the page to literally write every ability check that they could try to make, but it still shows like branching paths, or at least even if the path's not branching, multiple routes through the system to get to the other side. I think I'm just agreeing with you, I guess, in a very long-winded way.
This brings up.
I also love to just really quickly, like I love to, because you don't know, like you don't have space, because the other thing with pre-written adventures is like space, like you can't just write endlessly, and so sometimes
page count.
A big thing that I was taught by somebody else is like if you can think of like 2 spells, for example, that could be used, like this is a really dark room and players could light it using like a lantern or the light spell or any similarly leveled spell. So a lot of times I'll pick like basically is this a cantrip level problem or is this like a second level spell level problem? So that if the player's like, I want to use like L random spell I could never have thought of to solve this problem, the GM can like easily say like, well, this seems about equivalent to the spells that like the pre-written adventure wants me to use, or ignore me completely. But at least it helps people know generally like what the level of the challenge is meant to be.
This is an interesting combination of keeping the game on a story level by kind of letting them do whatever they can imagine in the moment, while maintaining some level of mechanical rigor, where it's like the goal of this room was to test them in whether or not they had the 3rd level daylight spell, right? That's what a vampire does. A light cantrip doesn't do it, but vampires are weird. Vampires require sunlight. That's a whole conversation about D&D mechanical minutia. Let's say there's magical darkness filling a room, right? And that's what a 3rd level daylight spell will punch through. But yeah, if the test is not, did they think to prepare the daylight spell, which is, I think, a ridiculous challenge unless there's some context for it. But are they willing to expend a 3rd level spell slot as a resource? Yeah, because D&D is at its end a game of attrition. Then that makes sense.
That's. I mean, I talked about it. I think we did a video on puzzles on the Ghostfire Gaming YouTube channel recently, and one of the puzzles I came up with, it was a cipher. Then once you decoded the cipher, it was kind of like you have to brew a potion, and then drink that potion will solve a thing. The ingredients of the potion are, in theory, all inside the room. And because it was written out a little bit squirrely-ish, there could be multiple things inside the room that could be like one ingredient as well. For example, one of them was like asking for a spellcasting focus. So it was one of the ingredients. So it could be a holy symbol as well. It could be a spellcasting focus that the players could sacrifice for themselves. They could search the room, and if they, rolled a really high perception check, you'd be like, oh, there was one in the corner over there. Go figure you found it, or whatever. But the point being that, like, yeah, there's lots of different solutions. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I was also thinking Arpeggio, on that note, Arpeggio asked in chat, designing it to have several different solutions, does that make it more friendly to players coming up with unexpected solutions? And I think the answer is yes, as well, because it gets the GM thinking of what the multiple solutions are.
Can I ask you, Ben?
Yeah.
Was it a nuclear train of thought?
No, but I do remember what I was going to say. It was about, it is, can the players solve the puzzle without expending resources, or are they willing to expend resources to solve it easily? It goes back to that question about like skill. It doesn't stop you from being able to solve it if you don't expend the resource, but it doesn't. Yeah, I think you get what I'm saying. I'm kind of lost.
I want to say one thing live for later viewers that aren't in chat, because I said it in chat and I think it's worth saying, is that this whole magical darkness can be overcome by daylight thing. That's only a faux pas of a DM challenge if you're playing in a story-driven game where the goal is to get to the boss at the end of the dungeon in one run through the dungeon. And right, that's the sort of stuff we tend to see in modern published adventures, and I think in the sort of modern 5-room dungeon. But if you're playing in the D&D box set Caves of Chaos, Return to the Borderland, or whatever it is, if that's a sort of dungeon where you make multiple ventures in and out, and you're having these little mini adventures along the way that will culminate towards something, then that
if it's
is
a sandbox or a West Marches game, maybe.
Yes.
Well, I was going to say
West Marches is great.
Metroidvania style.
Yeah, Metroidvania style, which of course came out of this kind of D&D stuff of keeping a close map. And then it's like, oh, this is a locked door, right? That in effect, that darkness spell is a lock, and the daylight spell is a key. And you might find a temporary key in a daylight scroll, which could open the lock once, and then you better hope that you only need to open that lock once. You never have to retrace your steps, or you better hope you find a shortcut. Or you could go through some other kind of challenge that results in you getting a staff of light, or the wizard recording light into their spell book, or just leveling up enough that you can learn that spell, right? That's a lock with many keys, as long as they all return to something that can dispel magical darkness. Hell, dispel magic is a perfectly good key for that. And that's a challenge, right? That's an ingenuity and exploration challenge.
There's one, we're going a little bit over time, but there is one question, speaking of Tomb of Annihilation, and Will Doyle, who worked on Tomb of Annihilation. There was one strategy I noticed, and I wanted to get Erin and James's gauge on this in terms of adventure writing.
Wow.
Was that... All right, Ishmael.
Hey, what are you accusing me of?
I didn't think you were an expert.
My name's Dael. See.
Really? I've been calling you Ishmael this whole time. Anyway, the middle of Tomb of Annihilation is like the hex crawl, right? Famously. And you kind of wander around the different locations. But something I noticed when I was running that hex crawl was that some locations on that map are sort of fully fleshed out little mini dungeons. And some locations get kind of a paragraph or two to describe what they are. And I was like, oh, this seems odd that there's not more fleshed out here, because this seems like an important location. It's marked on the map. And my thought process was, this is why I assumed the designers had done it this way, was that the book has limited pages. They can't possibly create dungeons for every one of these locations and make the world feel populated enough. And so these are intentionally left as open-ish areas for a game master to inject their own creativity directly into the adventure. That's kind of what I ended up doing. I think one of the like lost cities is like a plateau, and the city's at the top of it. And I think there's a hag living there, but I might have put the hag there. I can't quite remember. But I ended up turning that into a full self-designed dungeon, which I kind of assumed was the intention if you wanted to run that as a fully fleshed out sort of place. I know you don't know the answer if that's strictly what Will Doyle was thinking when that was put in there, but is that a strategy? Am I on the money there? Is that a way that adventure writers can provide more content without, breaking their own back, writing endless dungeons?
Not at all true. But it's funny. I think that is a way to go, though. I think, DMs are going to put their own spin on things, whether you give them an empty room, a room with 10,000 items, whatever you do, sure. They will always add more in. So I think you don't necessarily need to leave room for it. I think there are two things at work in addition to maybe that they just wanted to leave room for you. One is that, like, sometimes people can feel weird about the idea that every room in it, like every place in a dungeon, like has some crazy thing in it. It's like, who lived here? Why is there just not a room that's just like a kitchen? Like, the bathroom has a trap? Like, that just seems like excessive. What? Like, why would you put a trap in your own bathroom? You gotta pee.
Bathroom traps.
So I think sometimes it's like for realism, like sometimes people will try to like maintain some realism of the space. Like, it doesn't I can't think of a good reason that there would be a weird thing here, so I'm not gonna put one here. And then, like, if somebody disagrees with me, they can add it in. But I will say sometimes it is a word count thing. And one way to get around that is to create a specific type of trap that is like a multi-stage trap. I'm a big fan of, like, the first time you run into this endless pool of water, it does this. And then if you like defeat it, like, it does this the next time, something that kind of scales up. And then you can say, like, you could find that trap in the toilet of the bathroom, and also the well that you find, and also the other thing, so that each time you mention it, you don't actually have to use the word count again, because it's basically the same thing found in different places, but maybe there's a way to tweak it. Maybe there's a roll table where it has a slightly different like this time it does this instead of that. Like this time it spouts fire instead of ice. And that way you like end up feeling like you put all this like extra work in, and it feels thematically relevant. Cause like a big thing with dungeons also, and something I would say for pre-made adventures that we didn't mention before, is that you want to feel like there's some sort of theme, I think, like something that's like tying together your narrative. Like people in your home game, you can kind of make the theme as you go, but like it can be something very broad. Like in the Radiant Citadel adventure I did, which took place in God's Breath, which I'm now forgetting the name of, which is weird, is like, it's not important. That one was all about community. So like even the monsters are like a community, they're group monsters. There's a lot of monsters that work in tandem, and it's all about how the community works together and you helping the community. But because even the evil things are bad community, it has a feeling of thematic resonance. And so a lot of times, like if your theme is going to be bathrooms and why are they bad, and you like go into the dungeon of 1,000 bathrooms inside of Evil Town, which is a weird place. Like you're going to have a lot of maybe water themes. You're going to have a lot of bodily fluids going on there. And you're going to maybe think of something that could work in many rooms, but reinforces the idea that bathrooms are bad and we shouldn't have them.
And on that note,
can we have you for every episode, Erin? Can we just keep this energy forever?
Well, speaking of every episode, this is one of them, and it has to come to a close because we are a little bit over time. Erin, where can folks, apart from throwing a rock and hitting an RPG book, find you?
Oh, lovely. You can find me on Blue Sky at Nirele, which is Nirele. It is Erin backwards, if that helps you at all, or if you want to know why I came up with it 1,000 years ago. But also, if you ever want to hear me just talk about narrative generally outside of games, I'm one of the hosts of the Writing Excuses podcast, which drops every Sunday and is a 15-minute long podcast where we talk about writing in general, especially if anybody who wants to get into fiction writing wants to hear we're silly, we're fun, and it's only 15 minutes, so we won't harm you. That is also a good place to hear my voice. We might harm you, but we won't mean it. But that's where to find me.
With those excellent recommendations, we will be back next week, streaming on Twitch, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific on a Monday. It is 9 a.m. on a Tuesday if you're in Australia on the Eastern coast. And if you're somewhere else in the world, good luck to you figuring out the time zones. We hope to see you here. Likes, thumbs, stars, stuff. All help us. Nom, 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 nom. Love the yummy likes and stars in particular. Or subscribe. You know, you can do that too. I've been Ben Byrne here with Erin Roberts, James Hake, Dael Kingsmill. We will be back next week. Until then, ba-ba-da, ba-ba-da, ba-ba-da. This has been the Eldritch Lorecast. Ba-ba-da, ba-ba-da, ba. I don't know if I said that at the end.
And if you're in Brazil, congrats on the localized Portuguese coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah, babada-ba. Babada-ba to you, Brazil. Babada Brazil.
Great.
That's a good end.
Yeah. Perfect.